Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
The Grand Hotel's event room was packed when Simone Caldwell stepped onto the stage. She'd just signed an $80 million contract with pharmaceutical giant Morrison & Drake to expand her company. Clarion Beauty Tech camera flashes exploded as executives and celebrities applauded. Simone smiled with the kind of confidence only success brings, wearing a flawless white suit. Trevor Whitmore sat in the third row, as discreet as always. He wore a dark gray suit and watched his wife with an expression few could decipher. There was something there beyond admiration or pride. It was resignation mixed with a deep sadness he'd learned to hide over the years. Simone picked up the microphone. The room fell silent, waiting for her thank you speech. But instead of thanking investors or her team, she called Trevor by name. "Trevor, darling, could you come up here for a moment?" The audience grew curious. Trevor stood and walked to the stage. When he reached her side, Simone pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of her blazer and handed it to him. Trevor opened it slowly. It was divorce papers. "I need someone who can fly at my level," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And you, my love, were always only good for staying on the ground." The silence that followed was deafening. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others gaped in shock. An executive from Morrison & Drake whispered something to her colleague. Diane Ford, Simone's publicist, closed her eyes for a second, as if watching a car crash in slow motion. Trevor held the papers, looked at Simone for 3 seconds that felt like an eternity, and simply nodded. He folded the documents, put them in his pocket, and left the room. The silence broke only when the door closed behind him. Simone returned to the center of the stage and pulled Julian Reeves by the hand, a businessman known for his risky investments and salesman's smile. "This is the future I deserve," she announced as Julian kissed her in front of the cameras. Flashes exploded again. Some people forced smiles. Others pretended they had urgent calls to take and slipped out of the room. What Simone completely ignored was that she was destroying the only person who had truly built everything she was celebrating. 7 years earlier, Simone had nothing but an idea and a PowerPoint presentation. She worked a job she hated, saving every penny to try to bring her dream to life. Clarion Beauty Tech was just a pretty name and a promise to revolutionize the cosmetics market with sustainable technology. But promises alone never paid the bills. Trevor met Simone at an entrepreneurship conference in Chicago. She was at the cheapest booth at the event, trying to convince anyone who stopped to listen about her idea. Trevor stopped. He'd just walked out of a frustrating client meeting at the financial consulting firm where he worked and needed some fresh air. Simone spoke for 20 minutes about biopolymers, sustainability, and a future where beauty and environmental responsibility would go hand in hand. Trevor listened to every word. "Do you really believe in this?" he asked when she finished. "With every fiber of my being," Simone replied, her eyes shining. Trevor fell in love right then. Not just with her idea, but with the raw passion in her eyes, the kind he rarely saw in people who lived only to make money. They exchanged numbers. Their coffee dates turned into dinners. 3 months later, they were living together. 6 months after that, Trevor proposed to Simone at the modest restaurant they visited every Friday. But the life of an entrepreneur was cruel. Simone knocked on door after door, and they all slammed shut. Investors said the idea was good but too risky. Banks denied her loans because she had zero track record in the market. Frustration began to erode the spark Trevor loved so much. He saw Simone cry in the bathroom when she thought he was asleep. He watched her scribble numbers in notebooks, trying to make impossible math work. That's when Trevor made a decision that would change everything. He held a small stake in the tech company his father had founded years earlier. It was worth about $200,000. Trevor sold it all. Every share. Every cent. And he put the money into a separate account. But he knew $200,000 would only be enough to get started. So Trevor created Greyhaven Capital. It was a ghost investment firm, operating through intermediaries and shell companies spread across 3 states. Trevor used contacts he'd built over years in consulting, people who owed him favors or trusted his financial instincts. Clarion's first capital injection came through an investment fund in Delaware. Simone was ecstatic. Finally, someone believed in her. What she never knew was that Trevor was behind that fund, using an old college friend as an intermediary. With the initial money, Simone set up a small lab and hired 2 chemists. But labs needed raw materials, and reliable suppliers were rare for new companies. Trevor called Marcus Chen, a chemical components distributor he'd helped expand years earlier. Marcus owed Trevor more than money, he owed him loyalty. "I need you to supply materials to a company called Clarion Beauty Tech," Trevor said in a late-night call. "And I need you to give them special payment terms. 60 days for the first batch. 90 for the second." Marcus agreed without question. Simone received an email from a company called Chen Industrial Supplies offering exactly what she needed, with terms that seemed too generous to be true. She accepted, thinking her luck had finally turned. Every time Clarion hit a roadblock, Trevor moved pieces on the board. When Simone needed office space but rents were outrageous, a property became available for half the market price. The owner? A company controlled by Greyhaven. When she needed regulatory approvals, Trevor called specialized lawyers he knew, paying for their services anonymously. Simone worked 18-hour days, and Trevor admired her for it. She was tireless, brilliant, determined. But determination alone never knocked down walls of bureaucracy and capital. Trevor knocked them down while Simone ran toward her dreams. 2 years after the first investment, Clarion launched its first product line. It was a modest success. Simone celebrated as if she'd conquered the world. Trevor celebrated with her but was already planning the next steps. He knew moderate success quickly turns into failure if you stop running. That's when the opportunity with Morrison and Drake appeared. A pharmaceutical giant looking to partner with sustainable cosmetics companies to improve its public image. The problem was Morrison and Drake was targeting larger, established firms. Clarion was too small to be on their radar. Trevor spent 3 months studying Morrison and Drake's structure. He discovered that Robert Hayes, their vice president of strategic partnerships, had a son doing an MBA at Wharton, the same school where Trevor had earned his master's years earlier. Trevor called old professors, made generous donations to university programs, and got invited to give a talk on strategic investments. Robert Hayes was in the audience. After the talk, Trevor went straight to the point. They discussed the market, trends, and the future of sustainable cosmetics. Trevor mentioned Clarion as if it were just another company, but he planted seeds of curiosity in Robert's mind. 2 weeks later, Robert asked his team to investigate Clarion Beauty Tech. The report showed a company with solid growth, reliable suppliers, stable finances, and expansion potential. What the report didn't mention was that much of that stability came from an invisible network controlled by Trevor. When Simone received the email from Morrison and Drake inviting her to a meeting, she screamed with joy. Trevor was in the next room, reviewing Greyhaven spreadsheets. He heard her scream, smiled, and went back to work. Negotiations lasted 6 months. Simone worked day and night, preparing presentations, refining proposals, traveling for meetings. Trevor stayed home, supporting her the way he always had, behind the scenes. He never asked for recognition. He never demanded she know what he did. Because his love was the kind that rejoices in the other's success, even if that success never brings gratitude. But something began to change in Simone during those 6 months. The higher she climbed, the more distant she became. Conversations that once lasted hours were now reduced to, "I'm tired, let's sleep." Romantic dinners turned into last-minute cancellations. Trevor noticed but convinced himself it was just a phase. that once everything settled, they'd go back to how they were before. Then came the day Simone met Julian Reeves. He showed up at one of Morrison and Drake's meetings as a potential additional strategic partner. Julian was handsome, charming, wore expensive watches, and drove a Porsche. He talked about millions as if they were pennies. Simone was impressed. Julian started appearing more often. First at business meetings. Then at social events. Then at dinners that, according to Simone, were important for networking. Trevor tried to express his discomfort, but Simone reacted with irritation. "Are you jealous of business conversations? You need to grow up, Trevor. I'm building an empire here." Trevor swallowed the words he wanted to say. He trusted Simone. Or at least, he tried to. The contract was finally signed on a Tuesday morning. $80 million. The greatest achievement of Simone's life. She called Trevor, crying with happiness. "I did it, love. We did it." Trevor smiled on the other end of the line. "I'm proud of you. There's an event tonight to celebrate. You're coming, right?" "Of course I am." Trevor put on his best suit. He arrived at the Grand Hotel half an hour before the event started. Simone was in the dressing room getting ready, and Trevor offered to help with anything she needed. But she barely looked at him. "I'm busy, Trevor. Go wait for me in the audience." It was the first time Trevor felt something break inside him. It was a deep sadness, the kind you feel when you realize you're losing someone you love but still refuse to fully believe it. He sat in the third row. He watched Julian Reeves enter and greet Simone with 2 kisses on the cheek. He watched how she smiled at him, that smile that used to be only for Trevor. And then came the speech. The cameras. The applause. And finally, his name being called. When Simone handed him the divorce papers, something inside Trevor shattered completely. But it shattered silently, like glass falling onto carpet. He looked at those papers, looked at the woman he loved, and understood he'd already lost her long ago. That moment on stage was just the official confirmation of something that had died slowly, in cancelled dinners, cut-off conversations, and smiles that were no longer his alone. He took the papers and left. A few people tried to stop Trevor on his way out, asking if he was okay, offering comfort. But he just shook his head and kept walking. When he reached the street, he got into the first taxi he saw. "Where to?" the driver asked. Trevor gave the address of a small apartment he kept secret, the place where he ran Greyhaven Capital. The whole ride, he held the divorce papers and thought about 7 years of sacrifice. Of unconditional love. Of working in the shadows so she could shine in the light. When he got to the apartment, Trevor laid the papers on the table and stared at them for a long time. A pen sat beside them, waiting for his signature. But he was still processing what had happened. Simone had really done it. In front of hundreds of people. She'd publicly humiliated the man she claimed to love, as if he were an old trophy that needed discarding to make room on the shelf. And then she'd posed for photos with Julian Reeves, smiling as if she'd just shed a heavy weight. It was at that moment, sitting alone in that apartment, that something changed inside Trevor. He looked around the room. Folders were stacked on the sofa, documents from all of Greyhaven's operations scattered across the coffee table. Each folder represented part of the invisible structure that held up Clarion Beauty Tech. Trevor opened one. It was the contract with Chen Industrial Supplies. Marcus Chen had been supplying Clarion with raw materials under special terms for 5 years, 90-day payments, volume discounts, priority deliveries, all because Trevor had asked as a personal favor. He opened another folder. The lease for Clarion's main office. The property belonged to a company controlled by Greyhaven. Simone paid less than half the market rate. Another folder. Working capital loans provided by investment funds Trevor coordinated through intermediaries. He started doing mental calculations. If he removed all the support he'd provided over the years, how long would it take for Clarion to collapse? 3 months? 6? Trevor estimated 4 to 6 months, depending on how quickly Simone tried to find alternatives. But Trevor made a crucial decision that night: he would be strategic. Patient. Acting on impulse, making angry calls, tearing everything down at once, would be crude. Emotional. And emotion clouds judgment. Instead, Trevor would let Simone enjoy her victory for a few weeks. Let her celebrate, give interviews, pose for magazines with Julian Reeves. And then, calmly and methodically, he would start removing the foundations. One at a time. Slowly enough that she'd try to fix things. Quickly enough that she'd never succeed. Because immediate revenge would be momentary satisfaction. But calculated revenge? That would be a lesson Simone would carry forever. Trevor picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers. Then he put everything into an envelope. He'd mail it the next day, along with a simple letter agreeing to all terms. Simone probably expected a fight, lawyers, disputes over assets. But Trevor would give her exactly what she asked for: total freedom. After all, she'd need to be completely free to discover on her own the weight of the fall. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and went to bed. He lay there staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, Trevor felt a strange peace. Because he finally understood something fundamental: you can only carry someone on your back as long as they allow it. The moment they decide your back is ground to step on, you have 2 choices. Keep being trampled or stand up and let them fall. Trevor chose to stand up. And while Simone celebrated at the Grand Hotel, toasting with champagne and receiving congratulations from executives and celebrities, Trevor slept peacefully for the first time in months. Because he knew castles built on invisible foundations crumble slowly when those foundations are removed. First, small cracks appear. Then the cracks widen. And finally, when you least expect it, the whole castle collapses. And Trevor had all the time in the world to watch it happen. 2 weeks after the Grand Hotel event, Simone was living the best moment of her life. Her photo was on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The New Queen of Sustainable Beauty." She'd done 3 TV interviews, all with Julian Reeves by her side, talking about her entrepreneurial journey and how she'd built everything with her own hands. The apartment she now shared with Julian was a penthouse overlooking the park, 4 times bigger than the house she'd shared with Trevor. Diane Ford watched it all with a mix of concern and resignation. She'd tried warning Simone about how fast things were moving, about how Julian seemed too good to be true, but Simone was drunk on success. And when someone's drunk, they rarely listen to sober advice. It was on a Thursday that the first problem surfaced. Simone was in Clarion's office when her CFO, a man named Paul Mitchell, walked in with a tense expression. "Simone, we need to talk about Morrison and Drake." "What about them?" "The contract signed." Paul placed a folder on the desk. "They've requested a full audit before releasing the funds." Simone frowned. "An audit? But they already did due diligence. Why an audit now?" "They say it's standard procedure for contracts of this size. They want to review the company's entire financial structure before transferring the $80 million. Simone rolled her eyes. "Fine, let them review. Our books are spotless." Paul hesitated. "There's something else." Marcus Chen called. "He's adjusting the terms for raw material supply." "Adjusting how?" "Payment in 15 days instead of 90. And prices are going back to market rates." Now Simone paid attention. "Wait, what? Why would he do that?" "He says he's restructuring the company and needs to improve cash flow." Simone grabbed the phone and called Marcus directly. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus, it's Simone. Paul told me about the new terms. Is this some kind of joke?" "Simone, nothing personal. It's just business. I'm applying the same terms to all clients. But we've had a 5-year relationship. You've always given us special terms. And I'll keep supplying you. Just under different terms. Simone tried negotiating, but Marcus was firm. When she hung up, she was visibly irritated. Paul was still there, waiting. Anything else? Simone asked, already dreading the answer. The building owner sent an email. When the lease expires in 3 months, rent goes to market rate. Simone felt a pang of anxiety. 3 problems in one day. Coincidence? It had to be. But something inside her started wondering if there was a pattern. Fix this, she told Paul. Find new suppliers if you have to. Negotiate the rent. And get all the documentation ready for Morrison and Drake's audit. Paul nodded and left. Simone sat alone in her office, staring out the window. She called Julian. Babe, I've got some issues at the company. Can you take a look? Julian was driving, she could hear traffic noise. Sure, honey. But I'm heading to a meeting now. We'll talk tonight? Okay. But that night Julian came home late, exhausted, and when Simone tried talking about Clarion's problems, he just said it was normal, that every company goes through adjustments, that she was worrying too much. Simone wanted to believe him. So she did. Meanwhile, Trevor was at the Greyhaven apartment, doing exactly what he'd planned. After 2 weeks of watching Simone shine in magazines and TV shows, he began executing his plan. The first call was to Robert Hayes, Morrison and Drake's vice president. Robert, it's Trevor Whitmore. We need to talk about some issues related to the Clarion contract. Trevor. What a surprise. I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry. Thanks. But I'm calling about something else. Did you thoroughly review Clarion's financial structure before releasing the contract funds? Robert hesitated. We did standard due diligence. Why? Because if I were you, I'd request a deeper audit before transferring $80 million. Just a suggestion from someone who knows this market well. Silence on the other end. Robert Hayes owed Trevor favors. He knew Trevor wouldn't give advice like this without solid reason. Are you saying there are problems? I'm saying it would be prudent to double-check. Especially the working capital structures and loan guarantees. I'll request a full audit tomorrow. Trevor thanked him and hung up. Then he called Marcus Chen. Marcus, I need you to revise the supply terms for Clarion Beauty Tech. Marcus was silent for a few seconds. Trevor, are you sure? This is going to squeeze them hard. I'm sure. Go back to market rates. 15-day payments, no special discounts. Can I ask why? Because I asked, Trevor replied, his voice colder than Marcus had ever heard it. Understood. Trevor made 4 more calls that day. Each one to a different piece of the board. The building manager. The investment funds providing working capital. A bank that always approved credit quickly. Each conversation was polite, professional, but the result was always the same: the special terms Clarion enjoyed were being removed. Trevor worked with a surgeon's precision. He knew exactly which supports to remove to destabilize the structure without making it collapse all at once. He wanted Simone to fight. He wanted her to try fixing things. Because the lesson would only be complete when she realized she was battling an invisible enemy who knew every weakness of her empire. 3 weeks after the initial audit, Clarion's problems multiplied. Morrison and Drake found inconsistencies in the financial reports. The inconsistencies were technical, hard to explain, but enough to freeze the $80 million until resolved. Paul Mitchell worked 20-hour days trying to answer the auditor's demands, but each answer spawned 3 new questions. Simone started losing sleep. She'd wake at 3 a.m., grab her laptop, and review numbers until dawn. Julian slept beside her, snoring softly, oblivious to the storm brewing. Diane showed up at the office one afternoon with bad news. "Simone, we need to talk about Julian." Simone was on the phone with a supplier, negotiating deadlines. She gestured for Diane to wait. When she hung up 5 minutes later, she looked exhausted. "What is it, Diane?" "There's an investigative piece about Julian's company. They're accusing him of tax fraud and money laundering." Simone felt her blood run cold. "What?" Diane handed her a tablet with the article open. It was from a respected investigative journalism site. The report detailed how Julian Reeves used shell companies to divert investor funds, reported fake profits, and held accounts in tax havens. "That's lies," Simone said, though her voice lacked the conviction she wanted. "Simone, the IRS has opened an investigation. This is serious. Julian says it's competitors trying to destroy his reputation." Diane took a deep breath. "And what if it's true? It could spill over to you. To Clarion. Investors will link you too. So what do you want me to do? Abandon him at the first sign of trouble?" The words came out before Simone could think. Diane looked at her with an expression mixing pity and irony. "You abandoned Trevor at the first opportunity you had. Why would Julian be any different?" Simone felt the words like a slap. "Get out of my office, Diane." "Simone. I said get out." Diane left, but before closing the door, she turned one last time. "Trevor would never have abandoned you. But you never valued that." The door closed. Simone sat alone, trembling with anger and something she refused to admit was fear. The following weeks were a nightmare. The investigation into Julian gained momentum. Leaked documents revealed suspicious transfers, fraudulent contracts, a complex web of corruption. Julian was called to testify. Then indicted. Then arrested. Simone watched on TV as Julian was led away in handcuffs. He shouted he was innocent, that it was a setup, that he had proof. But the handcuffs were real. The police van was real. And Simone realized, too late, that Diane had been right. With Julian in jail and Morrison and Drake freezing funds, Clarion went into freefall. Suppliers demanded upfront payment. The bank denied a crucial loan. 2 major investors sold their stakes. The company's stock, once worth $12, dropped to $3. Paul Mitchell resigned. He was polite, said he'd received a better offer, but Simone saw the truth in his eyes. He was abandoning a sinking ship. Diane quit too. She handed in a formal resignation letter and said goodbye with a hug that felt like a final farewell. "I'm rooting for you, Simone. Really. But I warned you. And you chose to ignore it." Simone was left alone trying to save Clarion. She cut costs, laid off staff, sold equipment. But it was like trying to empty the ocean with a leaky bucket. Every problem solved created 2 new ones. Every temporary fix lasted only days before collapsing. It was on a Tuesday night, 4 months after the Grand Hotel event, that Simone received an email that would change everything. It was from a company called Greyhaven Capital. The email was direct. They were interested in acquiring Clarion Beauty Tech's assets. Simone looked up Greyhaven. She found little information: a discreet investment firm, diversified portfolio, solid history but low profile. She called the number in the email. A man answered. Professional, polite voice. "Greyhaven Capital, how can I help?" "It's Simone Caldwell from Clarion Beauty Tech. I got an email about asset acquisition." "Ah yes, Ms. Caldwell. We were expecting your call. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss terms?" Simone wanted to ask how they knew about Clarion's situation, but the truth was everyone in the market knew. Her fall was as public as her rise had been. "Can it be tomorrow?" Tomorrow at 2 p.m. work for you? It works. The man gave her an address downtown. Simone hung up and stared at her phone. This was it. Sell everything. Start over. At least she'd walk away without catastrophic debt. At least she'd have a dignified exit. She called Diane. She needed someone there. Diane, I know you quit, but I need you tomorrow. One last time. Diane hesitated. What happened? A company wants to buy Clarion. I need someone I trust at this meeting. Simone. Please. Diane sighed. What time? 2 p.m. I'll be there. The next day, Simone woke early. She chose a dark gray suit, pinned her hair back, applied light makeup. She wanted to look professional, composed, in control, even though inside she was crumbling. Diane met Simone outside the building. They walked in together. Greyhaven's office was discreet. A receptionist led them to a meeting room. Mr. Whitmore will be right in, the receptionist said before leaving. Simone looked at Diane. Whitmore? Diane turned pale. Simone. The door opened. Trevor walked in. Simone felt the floor vanish beneath her. She stood, swaying, bracing herself against the table. What? Trevor? Trevor wore a flawless dark suit. He closed the door behind him and walked to the table. Surprised? Simone tried to speak, but no words came out. Diane placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Trevor pulled out a chair and Saturday, Greyhaven Capital is mine, Simone. It always was. The words took a few seconds to sink in. When they did, Simone felt her legs give out. She sat heavily. You did this on purpose? Did what? Stopped propping up an empire I built? Yes. What empire? I built Clarion. Trevor smiled, but it held no joy. Do you really believe that? He opened a folder he'd brought and started laying documents on the table. Contracts. Bank statements. Emails. Each paper was evidence of something Simone had never known. The first investment you received? I put up the money. The supplier who gave you special terms? I asked him to. The office with below-market rent? My property. The loans that were always approved? Funds I controlled. Simone stared at the documents as if reading a foreign language. This is a lie. A lie? Trevor picked up one contract and showed it to her. Here's the deed to the building. Registered to Greyhaven Investments LLC. Here's the Chen Industrial Supply contract, with a clause stating special terms upon third-party request. Want me to keep going? Diane stayed silent, but tears filled her eyes. She'd always suspected Trevor did more than Simone acknowledged, but seeing the full extent was devastating. Simone shook her head. Why? Why would you do this? Because I loved you, Trevor replied, and for the first time his voice held emotion. I loved you so deeply I wanted to see you shine. And you did. But at some point, you started believing the shine came only from you. You forgot someone was holding the lantern. Trevor, And when you handed me those papers on stage, in front of hundreds of people, do you know what hurt most? You smiled. You smiled for the cameras like you just shed a dead weight. In that moment, I realized you never knew who I really was. And you never wanted to. Simone started crying. Tears streamed down her carefully made-up face. I was wrong. I admit it. I was arrogant, I was cruel. But you destroyed everything. Trevor slowly shook his head. I just stopped building. That's an important difference. Everything that collapsed did so because it was propped up on foundations you never knew existed. I removed the foundations. The fall was the consequence. But why? Revenge? Trevor was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. A lesson. You needed to understand that no one builds empires alone. That behind every success are people working in the shadows, making sacrifices that go unrecognized. You stepped on those people. You stepped on me. And you thought it was your right. Simone covered her face with her hands, sobbing. And now? Are you going to buy everything that was mine and leave me with nothing? Trevor opened another folder. Inside was a purchase agreement. I'm offering $5 million for Clarion's assets. It's less than they're worth, but more than you'd get from any other buyer right now. Take it or leave it. Simone looked at the contract through her tears. $5 million. Months ago, she'd been worth 50 times that. But now? Now she had debts she could barely manage. What if I refuse? You'll be completely bankrupt in 3 weeks. Lose everything. Walk away with debts you'll carry for the next 10 years. Simone picked up the pen. Her hand trembled so badly she could barely hold it. She signed the contract. Each letter felt like a piece of her soul being torn away. Trevor took the contract and put it in his folder. Then he stood. Wait, Simone said, also standing. Can we talk? About us? Trevor looked at her. Really looked. As if seeing someone he once knew but who was now a stranger. Talk about what, Simone? About how you called me incapable? About how you traded me for a criminal? About how you destroyed 7 years of marriage on a stage, in front of cameras, just to prove a point? I was wrong. I know I was. You're sorry because you lost everything. If you were still on top, with your $80 million, your penthouse, your magazine covers, would you be thinking of me now? Simone opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because they both knew the answer. Trevor walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. I forgive you, Simone. I forgive you because holding on to anger would give you space in my life that you've already proven you don't deserve. But forgiveness is different from forgetting. It's different from going back. You had a man who loved you unconditionally. Who sacrificed everything for you. And you threw him away like trash. Some bridges, once burned, turned to ashes. And ashes can't be rebuilt. He left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Simone collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Diane stepped closer and hugged her, letting her cry on her shoulder. I lost everything, Simone cried. I lost everything. Diane gently pulled Simone back and looked her in the eyes. You lost what really mattered a long time ago. The rest was just consequence. 3 months later, Trevor sold Clarion's assets to a European cosmetics company for $42 million, a $37 million profit. With the money, he started an investment fund focused on supporting small entrepreneurs, especially those with brilliant ideas but lacking resources and connections. The fund was called Phoenix Capital. Because, as Trevor explained in an interview, some people deserve a second chance to rise from the ashes. But first, they need to learn the humility of recognizing they've fallen. Simone saw the interview on TV. She was in a small apartment, working as a startup consultant, earning in a month what she used to spend on one dinner. Julian Reeves was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Morrison and Drake faced its own scandal when it was discovered several executives were involved in schemes similar to Julian's. But what hurt Simone most was the lesson she'd learned too late: you can conquer the whole world and still lose everything that matters. You can climb so high you forget who held the ladder. And when you finally fall, you discover the people you stepped on to get to the top are the same ones you'd need to get back up. Trevor found peace. He met a woman named Sarah Chen, Marcus's niece, at an entrepreneurship conference. She was a literature professor, quiet, kind, with no ambitions to build empires or appear on magazine covers. She just wanted someone who loved her sincerely. And Trevor, finally free from the chains of a love that was never returned the way he deserved, learned to love again. But this time, with someone who valued the man he was, not what he could do for her. Diane Ford opened her own PR agency. Her first client was Trevor's Phoenix Capital. They became close friends, united by the shared experience of watching Simone destroy herself through pride. And Simone? She kept working, rebuilding her life piece by piece. But every night before bed, she'd look at a photo tucked in her drawer. It was of her and Trevor on their wedding day. He looked at her with that pure love she only recognized when it was too late. She learned something no business school teaches: true success is measured by the people who stay by your side when you lose everything. And the greatest failure is realizing you destroyed those people when you had it all. Trevor was right about one thing: some bridges, once burned, turned to ashes. And Simone would spend the rest of her life trying to rebuild something from ashes the wind had already carried away. Her real defeat was realizing she'd won the wrong battle, fought on the wrong field, and by the time she understood the game, the prize that truly mattered was already gone. Forever. And that's life's cruelest lesson: you always realize the value of something when you lose it. And some losses are permanent. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.